Welcome to the new Design for Living here on KONR Radio. It is a talk show that is dedicated to reimagining how we live, how we love, and how we treat each other. And today, under the category of how we live, of course, is the topic of how we die. On death and dying is the topic for our show today. And it is in memory of, in acknowledgement of, and as a way for me to honor the life of a dear friend, the husband of my best friend, Jeffrey Young. And I want to say up front, with permission from his wife, my dear friend Christina, I'm here to talk about this today because in the new Design for a Living, there is a new way to be in relationship with death and dying. And I had the profound opportunity to once again step into that new way. And I'm here to talk about it with you, to take your phone calls in just a little bit, and to stretch the canvas of our thinking around a topic that oftentimes is mysterious to us. It is oftentimes out of reach, something we witness but not necessarily a part of, in the hopes that if you're going through loss right now, if you're literally in the midst of holding space for someone you love who's crossing over into the spirit world, that some of this today can be comforting and informative. I do also want to acknowledge and recognize my guest in the studio today, Brian Corvo, and her beautiful company, Rest with Radiance. Bree, thank you so much because you truly said yes in a way that is rare. I was talking with Christina yesterday, talking about wanting to do the show like this today. We talked about death doulas. I did a generic search. Several people came up. Something just resonated with me and you. I sent you an email last night. You called me about an hour ago, and we chatted, and at first we weren't sure if this was the thing to do today, but yet you said, you know what, this feels right. I'm jumping in my car and I'll see you over there. And I just want you to know how much that means to me and to the audience listening today, because you're going to bring some depth and perspective that I think is going to be, I know is going to be a perfect complement to what we talk about today. Before I get more into my own experience, and I know we're going to commingle our conversation here around all of it, how did this become something you stepped into? The topic of death and dying. I know you know yourself to be an educator, helping people understand the end-of-life options that we have in the new design model, as well as some other services listed on your site. But what caused you to step into this kind of topic?
Yeah, good question. I think, first off, it's this is what I would want for myself. And, just doing that reflection on what I think that I would want and seeing that there's different ways that this can happen for us versus maybe ways that we've seen this in the past or with other family members or what we've seen in our childhood. But really, it was literally seeing the sign. I never knew about an end-of-life doula. I was in a yoga class, and I remember having this teacher, Justine, who started Gather.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, and I remember going up to her after class and just thinking, or telling her, if there was ever a thing as an end-of-life doula, she might not even remember this, but you're who I would want next to me. It was just knowing that there's this energy or something that I would want held around me and this support and what I would want that to feel like. And then time passes and then one day I Googled it and I'm like, this is a thing, this exists.
And was it an immediate resonance to it?
Yeah, I was like, okay, there's a place to start.
And let me just say, to further add to the perfection of your time here with me today, I do a monthly women's group called Women Gathering.
Okay.
And we do it at Gather. So I know Justine.
Okay.
And she is a beautiful soul, and that is obviously an incredibly sacred place. So as you can see, we thought this was what it was, but perhaps it's been, in the stars for a long time. So we're going to come back to more of you. I want to set a little bit of this up with Jeff, and feel free to jump in as you're inspired to. And again, with permission from his wife and an acknowledgement of boundaries and personal moments and all of that. But Christina is so awesome that she is here to join me in pulling back the curtain on this topic, using our experience with Jeff as an opportunity to take the deep dive into death and dying. What I want to say first and foremost is that this is shocking, and this remains shocking. And the way in which all of this unfolded is something that will stay with me forever, because it challenged everything I know about life and death and dying. And as a spiritual person who's traveled on the path and taken classes and have participated in services and rituals around death and dying, I was already in the new design around it. But what happened between myself, Christina, and her husband was so profound that I realized, we need to talk about this. We need to normalize death and dying so that we can have an interactive experience with it, not just mentally and emotionally and spiritually, but physically, which I know is a lot of what you bring to the conversation as well, Bree. And so for those who knew Jeff but are shocked as well around his sudden passing, what I can share with you is, and again, some of this sharing is to help us realize that first our body whispers, then it talks, then it shouts, and if necessary, it screams. And the importance in the new design model to really be tuned into your body's language and to not let the mind, which isn't the body, dismiss the signals and the language of the body when it's speaking to us. And so with Jeff, he was experiencing some vertigo. And this is a fit man. This is a marathon runner who's traveled the world running marathons. This is a man who has summited Denali, has climbed big mountains. So here's a man whose awareness of his body and his health at the top, right? A runner every day, is a huge, huge member of the running community, a mentor to so many people, a coach. So he's got an established presence here in Anchorage. And so when he was talking about vertigo, it was just, of course, what anybody would do. I'm going to go to the doctor, see what this is. Like, we already knew about the crystals in the ear and that you can do some movements with the head that realigns it, because he had had a bike accident last year. And so we were just living in this, normal space of something's going on. I'm going to go to the doctor. And then, however, other things were starting to happen, including a real visual confirmation of imbalance, right? There was some staggering and some inability to suddenly just walk without needing to hold on to a wall and things like that. So by the time Jeff got to the hospital on November 1st, we were clearly seeing something was going on. And what we came to find out 2 weeks later, which if anybody has ever waited, that's why Tom Petty sings, the waiting is the hardest part, because we were seeing change every day. And it was excruciating, more so for Jeff than from us, but it was excruciating to witness something that we couldn't apply anything to because we didn't have a diagnosis. Every conceivable test was done, and then they were done a second time, and the doctors were scratching their heads. We knew it was neurological, but what exactly was it? And, his brother had done research based on symptoms and had said upon his arrival, I hope it's not one of these two things, because this is not what we want. One being brain cancer or tumor in the brain, and the other being prion disease. So where you have cancer as a title, you have prion disease as a title, and then you have various diagnoses within those diseases and illnesses. And so prion disease is fatal, and it's a neurological degenerative disease that in a way I feel kind of tricks the body, because we have proteins and we create proteins, and this is a deformed protein, so to speak. This is a very layman's version of what is probably better said medically. But the body doesn't see it necessarily as an enemy, right? So you're not necessarily going to find it in the white blood cells and things like that. And yet, with every day, things were significantly changing. So we're waiting for results while attending to the moment, also trying to stay neutral, which is another part of the new design model. Maybe, Bree, you know about this in your own work as well. Whereas in the old design model, we would worry. We would allow the mind to just take us for a ride and we'd go with it. But because of Christina's spiritual consciousness and our shared spiritual partnership, we knew the best thing to do was to stay in that neutral zone because the moment required us to be present. And if we went off into worry, then we wouldn't have been fully available for what was actually happening. Now, of course, we did experience the worst case scenario. And at that moment, we realized, wow, this is shocking. This is unbelievable. This is, like I was saying on another podcast that I do, the senses tell you what's going on. The senses says, here's Jeff, and he's in a hospital bed, and these things are happening. But there's something within that just pushes up against that and says, no, this can't be happening. This isn't happening, and all those words that we use, shocking, devastating, stunning, unbelievable, right? And so because we also knew a lot about trauma and things getting stuck in the body when intensities like this happened, another thing we were able to bring to the experience is just trying to let as much of it pass through us as possible while we were dealing with this unbelievable experience. And so once Christina understood that the diagnosis was real and it was imminent, and we were already realizing prior to that moment that, gosh, could this even be reversible, right? As somebody starts to decline, she said right away, I'm bringing him home. Now, when my mom died in 2020, January 2020, we wanted to bring her home, and we had the bed at the house, and we were getting ready for that. But her needs required machinery that I realized I would not be able to properly handle, and realized, as crushing as it was, that wasn't going to be possible for her, as is true for many people if they have that level of dependence. But because Jeff was in the situation he was in, Christina got in touch with hospice, and they stepped up in a beautiful way. And, the bed came to the house, and we rearranged things, and such was the beginning of this sacred connection with death and dying. It was so profound. When my mom died, though we were able to do things that we did with Jeff, for my mom, we had time in the hospital. We spent like an hour with her, washed the body, prepared it with essential oils, and did that kind of thing, which was so phenomenal. I knew from that experience that I needed to get much more comfortable with death. And I was at another friend's bedside last year and really kind of forced myself to look at her and look at the stages and be able to identify it. It was so uncomfortable, but I knew I had to do it to break through that barrier. Did we cry? Of course. Did we mourn and have sorrow? Of course, And it was the beginning of my effort to change my relationship to something that was not only going to happen for everybody that still populated my life, but for myself as well. And so in that experience with Jeff, when that final breath came, we just had this incredible experience. We put on chanting music. We already had the essential oils. We already had the special candles. We transformed the experience into something so beautiful. And this idea that we could stretch the canvas of that moment wide enough to include the outrageousness of what was happening while simultaneously showing up for it in a sacred way was everything. Was just gave us the ability to do what we actually did, holding space for ourselves as well as this experience with Jeff. That also brought in nieces and nephews and other members of the family, which also was phenomenal. And we talked about this, Christina and I, this gift we gave them, this door we opened, this curtain we pulled back that allowed them to come into the experience in a very profound and real way. And I feel like that's another thing to say in the setup here with our discussion, is that by participating, there was something happened that made me realize afterwards that perhaps because we were so involved and had this sacred ceremony and was touching the body the way that we did, like there was a completeness that was allowed that would not have been there if we didn't do those things. I don't know if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it does. But what I'm basically trying to say is because we were literally hands-on, we were collaborators, we were participating in the experience. It wasn't something we were looking at through a glass window or from a sense of separation or awkwardness. By being involved in it, I feel like the moment got addressed so completely that it brought about afterwards a profound peace that is different from any other experience I've had with someone I know who has crossed over. And maybe, Bree, in your sharing, you have had this experience yourself or you've seen it with others. And even when they came for Jeff's body, they said, we've never seen anything like this. We've never seen anybody wrapped in swaddling clothing and prepared, and I was outside with the chimes and everybody was participating in the carrying out. Yep. It was so incredible. And I want to talk about it like this, first of course, because I have permission to, but also because it's important. And Jeff's life is important. And the suddenness and the outrageousness of how quick it all happened deserves this moment where we get to slow things down a little bit for the purpose of processing, integrating, honoring, and having this kind of conversation today on the show. So with that, Bree, I want to invite you in to share anything that's coming up for you about what I just shared.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's
a lot,
things that
I know.
Come up, right? I mean, it's incredible in that short amount of time of how you just showed up to that situation and to be with him and holding your own grief and trying to make sense of this and then tending to him during this period. And like what you mentioned, like that courage to not turn away and to be with him and not focusing on this diagnosis and seeing this other thing and being with him. And it's like, that love and tending to that we have with our people around us, that it was like that outpour to have it to continue even beyond life. And, it's like this same way that would show up in life is the way we can show up for others in death or in dying. And that's what I heard.
Because when I was a kid, like a young kid, and I was still in the Bronx, and my family was still connected to the Bronx where my grandmother lived, I don't remember funeral homes then. I remember the body in the parlor. So I came into an experience where our relationship to death was at home, was very intimate. The Italian women wearing black for many, many weeks, as a sign that communicated to society, I'm mourning, we are grieving. When we moved to New Jersey, that's where my memory is more related to funeral homes. And not to dismiss them because they're beautiful people that run these beautiful expressions that we use as part of our ritual to acknowledge people's death and the dying process. But there is something to be said about the sterilization that has happened, whether it's birth, hence the birthing doula, right? Or death, hence now the death doula, and how those people and those experiences bring something organic and maybe even ancient back to two experiences that everyone has.
Right. And yeah, it's very cultural too. It depends on where we live and the practices that we had seen growing up. And a lot of maybe what we've seen helps us to determine like what we might not want for ourselves. And yeah, just being able to use the services, like say of a funeral home or other support that we might not be comfortable with carrying out ourselves. And we do what we can and ask for help in other ways where that might be needed.
Did you go through a training process or an education process for this role as a death doula?
Yeah, I did. And that's where I started. So like I was talking about, literally saw these signs. I was going into work. Every floor I went up, there was Alaska End of Life Alliance.
Wow.
And that I'm now on the board of. And they just started out having their first meeting a few years ago. And I was like, whoa, there's a group, there's people talking about this. Again, this exists and it's here. I'm going to this. And by the time I got up to the 5th floor, I was so excited and thinking like, okay, maybe, I'm going to look into the end-of-life doula trainings and see what's out there. And by noon, I signed up.
Wow.
I saw University of Vermont through their med school. They've got an online program where it's like a 9-week course that's live on the weekends. And at the end of it, you receive a certificate as an end-of-life doula training.
When you were in that experience, even though clearly it was prepared for you, you were getting some pretty specific breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, follow this path. Was there something in the process that really stands out for you that, just kind of blew your mind or opened your heart in a way that struck you or changed you?
Well, it led me to wanting more. I'm like, okay, I've received the training and it's like me to want to just try to consume as much information as I can. And then it's like, now what? I need to be at the bedside. I need more experience. And, I've got this academic part. And then that's where I signed up to become a hospice volunteer. And before that, Providence has a program. It's their NODA program. It's No One Dies Alone. And so you're called and there's a phone rotation where you sign up to sit at the bedside of people who are by themselves for a number of reasons and to be by the bedside.
It's powerful. My friend Mary Kay, she's a part of that. No One Dies Alone. It's just incredible to me that this service exists.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful because one thing I did see in the hospital, of course, you can't help but see it. There are a lot of people alone.
Right.
It's not necessarily the normal way that a patient has so many people connected to them and they show up or they're there for 10, 12 hours a day. Many people are alone for a variety of reasons, and many people can't find the people they would need to have the kind of transition that Jeff and others have had that I'm sure you've helped or have coached. 907-222-1061. That was Jeff's brother, Greg, that called me on my personal phone. Sorry about that, Greg. But if you'd like to call in, you can do so. 907-222-1061. I'd love to hear maybe some ways that you've changed your relationship to death and dying or anything that's coming up for you or a question about our topic today as we pause to acknowledge and celebrate the life of Jeff Young, a dear friend of mine, husband of my best friend, Christina, and the experience that we had bringing him home and being able to be a part of not only his transition, but also preparing his body for his next great marathon run. What kind of people do you find calling you or emailing you about your services?
The folks that end up reaching out most, it's a lot of caregivers who are seeking support. And sometimes maybe they're supporting someone that isn't as comfortable talking about this, and they're looking for just someone to listen, getting some ideas on how to approach these conversations, how best to support someone when they need a lot of support themselves as a caregiver. I mean, the amount of care that caregivers.
I've been one, and it's a very specific walk.
Yeah.
Especially if you either go to the person and step out of your own life to be of service, or they come into your actual home, or they live nearby. The role of a caregiver is truly unlike any other thing, any other role I've ever done. It's sacred, it's difficult, it's meaningful, it's inconvenient, right? It's all these things, and yet what threads it to the experience and to the individual is love. And that's what ultimately moves you. So caregivers need the support, but this is a good point you bring up, that they would seek your support in how do I broach this conversation with someone who's having difficulty talking about it? And what would be a piece of advice or counsel that you would give?
You know, we do have to meet people where they are, and sometimes we're not going to get there with certain folks. And I like to give the advice that, you know, even talking about what you want yourself, if you're comfortable talking about this, just sharing that and bringing that up, because it never feels like a good time or when do I do this, or it feels like you've got to really prepare for it. But just casually bringing up, you know, what matters to you, or, you know, maybe I just updated my advance directive, or I want you to know that this is in this location, or, you know, I had this conversation with someone else and, you know, this is what I would want in this situation. Like, how about you? So making it casual and light, talking about what you want, and maybe that kind of plants the seed for the conversation. Yeah.
That's really important because it can be awkward. I remember when my friend Ursula was dying of cancer. I think it's last year. Timelines are pretty blurry right now, but it was clear that this was going to happen, and she was preparing herself for it. And, you know, when she gave me the news that it was definitive, that it was stage 4 or whatever, it was far gone, there was a long pause on the phone, and I said to her, well, then let's have a celebration of your life while you're here. And this is another thing that we can do. And it's something we did do. We had a celebration of her life while she was alive to experience the love, the joy, and the legacy of her life in this community. Right. And she was literally luminescent. Her eyes, I've never seen anybody's eyes as crystal clear as her. Like something was already happening. There was this spiritual, heavenly atmosphere around her. I'll just never, forget how that was. And it was difficult, don't get me wrong. And it was a little awkward too, but people showed up, and pictures were taken, and she got a chance to speak and share how difficult this has been and how much she was going to miss us all. So again, there's no perfection, and it has all the elements of everything that life can be, awkward, tender, sacred,
Yep.
But the biggest component, I think, is just your willingness to show up for it.
Yeah.
Like you did today. You just said, okay, I'm going to come down. I'll see you in a little bit. Right? So talk more about some of the things that people seek you out for that maybe we don't think about, but should.
Yeah. Just that story that you shared, and like that she gets to hear and experience and feel all that love while she is here.
Exactly.
That's what the intention of that is.
And what we did in her hospital room, because she's a singer and was a performer in Anchorage and theater and whatnot, we had a dear friend, Van Horn Eli, who brought his guitar into the hospital room. And we were singing, and he was playing music. you know, and yes, he did sing Stairway to Heaven, you know, and we were all around her as we were for Jeff, you know, who was at the head, who was at the side, who was at the feet. And it was really something else. It was really incredible. People who know me know I definitely want Bruce Springsteen playing, you know, at my services. But back to the question: what else do you find people needing counsel on?
Right. Getting it, like, where to start with advanced directives with their paperwork. So that advanced directive is like that 2-part of the living will of the like life-sustaining treatment options that you would and you would not want if you weren't able to speak for yourself, and then naming a healthcare agent or that proxy who would make those decisions on your behalf. And what that really has is like getting these conversations started, talking about what we want and don't want, and then getting it documented, and then letting people know where that document lives.
Yeah.
So, yeah, documenting the care that we want.
Do you find that these days, younger people are thinking about this in a way that, you know, when I was in my 30s, even my 40s, I don't necessarily think I was thinking about this because I was living life to the fullest.
Right.
So I wasn't thinking about end of life.
I think we think of it because of maybe aging parents and having those conversations with them. And then that gets, I think, younger folks to think, I need to be thinking about this. And, you know, this, again, maybe seeing what we don't want, what that other people have maybe gone through, and maybe seeking out what are the options available to us. Yeah.
Do you find that the option of dying at home is not something that people remember it as an option?
Yeah, I think that it's something that people do want it. You know, that's what the statistics say, is that most people do want to die in their own home. But because of maybe either, you know, we don't have the resources or support at home to make that happen, or having those conversations, because that takes a lot of extra support to make that happen.
Have you ever been at a bedside where there was this level of interaction as it relates to, you know, the body and the preparing of it prior to its, you know, departure to a funeral home?
Right. Camille, I haven't. And that's something that it's like, you know, initially that was my thing, that I was like, I want to get into this. I want to educate people on home funeral guidance and help people experience this, because, you know, that's something I want for myself deeply, and that I want to be involved with. And in my role, people are not going to pick up the phone and call someone they haven't yet met to invite them in one of these most intimate times and have someone be part of this with them. And so it made me think, you know, let's kind of go upstream and build these relationships. Let's do what might be a little bit easier to start to have these conversations, get things documented, talk about what we want. You know, I kind of compartmentalize it of like these offerings like before death, while we're actively dying, and then after a death has occurred, of like all these different things that we can be doing and all the options there. And that's what I find people calling about. And it's like, we'll make those connections then.
Yeah.
And
well, hopefully today also is an opportunity for people to learn more about your service, Rest with Radiance. Bree is one of a handful of death doulas that came up when I did my search. The phone lines are open if you want to call, 907-222-1061. We're doing the deep dive into the new design for death and dying, and my special guest is Brianne Corvo, who is a death doula, a death educator, and has created this beautiful company, Rest with Radiance. Another aspect of the new design for living that I want to talk about as it relates to the new design for death and dying is, you know, what is it really? What is death really? Everybody has their own thoughts about it, which is the way it should be. I can say that in my spiritual education and journey that began in 1991, I brought with me an Italian Catholic background. So I knew a lot about the mourning process. I knew about the black clothing. I knew about the wailing, the grieving. You know, that was something that clearly I grew up in, and as a result had as a understanding of this is normal, this is the way it is. But as I got into my spiritual path and started to examine my belief system and the programming and my consciousness, and came to really understand, oh my goodness, this is a massive shift. This idea that, and a lot of quantum science, I feel confirms this for us. And, these days on social media, it's quite amazing what has become normalized, like astrology, all of these things that perhaps were only spoken in private, are now found everywhere, which again is good. It dispels the myths. It activates conversations where there were none. And as you said, Bree, it gives us an opportunity to talk and think about things that maybe we're not, but, we should be. And so on my spiritual journey and in my spiritual path, for me, there's a spirit. There is an awake, aware, alive, invisible, what I call love intelligence that not only creates the body temple, but uses it to have this experience here on earth. And if you have been bedside with anyone, as I was with Jeff and with Ursula and with my mom, like you clearly see a moment when the soul has left.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes. And yeah. Yep. And
tell me more about
you start to see that like in those days leading up, staying with someone like that. I know, right? We all have our own experience with that in memory. There's someone that I'm thinking of and just observing and really, it's like slowing down in that time, seeing it in their skin. We see these changes, like the skin and in the eyes and the color of the eyes and the skin, the breathing changes.
And it requires mindfulness.
Yeah.
This slowed down watching.
And to be there, right? To watch and to not turn away. And
now, don't get me wrong. I wanted to.
Yeah. Right?
Because I was going through my own triggers as well.
Absolutely.
Right? But I chose to deal with that on my own because I wanted to be in service to my friend who was there for me when I was going through my own situation. And so it required my own choice and my own mindful choice to say, I'm going to bring compassion to what's coming up for me, but I'm going to keep this to myself because I still want to show up. And I'm still practicing how to be more present and mostly more comfortable with death while it's happening. But you're right. The breath in and of itself is something that is just incredible to me. And this idea that the first sensory element that comes online when we are developing in the womb is the hearing. Like if this doesn't tell you that the Creator is intelligent, I mean, I don't know what else does. To me, this makes me weep with such emotion because the idea that this Creator made our hearing the first thing. Why? Because we can hear the mother talking to the baby in the womb and people talking to the baby. Baby hears all that. And that's the last thing. So that when we're getting ready to make this transition, we're still hearing the voices and the confirmation of love that probably helps the soul on some level to feel the love, to heal the love, whether you're coming into the world or leaving it. But like the breath, that's incredible to watch the breath shift and change. Yeah. And the longer periods between them, like it's coming. Right. And even the spiritual idea of the mouth being slightly open as this escape hatch is just incredible. The way you can look at it through this different filter, this new design filter that changes the entire landscape.
Yeah, it just makes me think like something I've heard probably in training or somewhere, that it's like trust that, the body does know how to die. We know how to let go. And two, there, we know these things that hold us on and keep us here of like unfinished business and emotions. But seeing that in those like final hours and days, and then even at death, and then those hours and days after if we do spend time with a body, whether it's with our loved one or our like companion animals or pets that we choose to do this with too.
Yes.
That's my most recent experience. And I absolutely saw that where I was like, I'm going to practice what I preach and see how I companion myself during my pet loss, and saw that. And by day 4, when I kept my pet along with me in our home, and by day 5, when I buried him, I was ready. I saw those times. I saw that spirit leaving, and it was like, it's time. And that detachment and letting go felt natural in that time frame for me. And I think that that's what we get to experience when we choose to tend to our loved ones, like after death, that after death care, whether it's just for a few extra hours or we choose to do it over days, which we have the legal right to do. We have that ability, that we can come to that time where it feels more comfortable letting go of this physical form of our loved ones.
And the impermanence, right? So there's that whole part too.
Coming to terms just more slowly and engaging more with that grief hands-on.
Let alone the very interesting and unique ways these days as it relates to burial, cremation, and I don't know what the formal name is, but I remember someone talking about whenever they did that you can now like be organically cremated in Mother Nature.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that as an option here in Alaska. And so, that's called
what is that?
Recomposition, natural organic reduction, I don't know, like human composting.
Yes.
But it's there's a lot of different terms for these options that people want. And the more we talk about wanting different options for our final disposition, then we can work towards getting that.
Because it's ritual.
Absolutely. Yes. Having ceremony around this. Yeah. I think that that's how we begin to heal. And that's what we get to bring back.
Right.
These rituals. Yeah. And to create new ritual.
I know someone whose husband, his remains were composted into dirt that she then got delivered and is now part of her garden. And I mean,
yes, it exists.
That did send me home. I needed a moment with that. I was like, because I have access to to their home and their land, and I was just like, okay, I have to adjust to the fact that when I'm walking on the dirt, he's right here with us. So, but doesn't that just stretch the mind idea of what can happen?
Yeah, and I know just putting in a plug for a friend, Rachel, Alaska Natural Burial up on the hillside, working towards making this an option for people. And so that would be when we're choosing not to embalm and having natural burial in this space. And that's an option.
Even at the Jansen Funeral Home, and much love to those beautiful people for how they handled things with us, because the scattering of the ashes is now a very popular ritual. They have these containers, big and small, that carry the ashes, and then a top comes off, and there's a little hole at the top that you puncture when you're ready. That may not be needed, but just the idea that they were right up next to the urns and the caskets, I thought, this is the new design. Well, they even had it for pets as well. You can turn ashes into jewelry now. Yeah. It's just remarkable where we find ourselves in this topic of death and dying, which we are talking about. Today won't be the only day we talk about it, but on the heels of the death of my friend and my best friend's husband on Thursday morning, I really needed to talk about it and want to talk about it, and hope that what we're saying today offers you some comfort, some ideas, some insight. Bree Corvo is my guest today, and she's with her company Rest with Radiance. You can find that online. An educator who helps people know their end-of-life options and to prepare and support people like caregivers, family members, friends, to document, because that's the first slice of the pie, right? All the paperwork,
Right.
the power of attorney, the medical directive, the will, all those pieces. And Bree and I were just talking off the air how interesting it would be to have like a workshop, like a half a day or a day-long workshop where community could come together and support each other in the actual filling out of paperwork, or just create an environment where those tough conversations can have in a more supportive way. That is the new design right there, doing something like that in a community, setting. Have you heard of the 5 wishes?
I have, yeah. And yep, I know there's a lot of options out there, and it's great to be able to reflect on this. And
have you filled that out yourself?
I know I just went with the state of Alaska's advanced directive form, and that's what I've used. And then for all of the other like things, my preferences of how I want things to be like while I'm dying or after death, then I've written more of these narratives and put down contacts of who to reach out to, or maybe explained what I'd wish for and their role to be.
So important.
Yeah.
I mean, I got halfway through the 5 wishes because that's very specific.
Yeah.
That really drills down as it relates to the final hours, like what giving people a chance to arrive from, flying in or whatever. Like it really, and I had to take it in chunks. I need to go back to it now. Christina and I are dedicated to finishing this up because you never know. I mean, that's what I walked away with from this experience. Like, we walk around knowing. No. I mean, we know what we know as far as instinct and intuition is. Right. But as far as life and when it's our time or how quickly it could happen, like, you just don't know. And being prepared is not only a gift to give yourself, but it is really a gift to give the people that are in your life and will be working and dealing with this on your behalf. So the 5 wishes is the name of the document I'm talking about, but the state does offer a very extensive form as well that has a lot of these questions in it, even if you just print it out and begin the process of thinking about it.
Yep.
Because even though the holidays are here or coming and we have Thanksgiving, I think it's this Thursday. Yeah, okay. And and there's a forced feeling of joy and all of that. It's not always the case.
Right.
That's another thing. How do you interact with these days of joy and merriment when, in fact, you're experiencing, deep sorrow, either from the loss of a pet or, a person? It can be challenging. Today, I just am so grateful that Brian Corvo joined me today spontaneously. Just said, yes, let's do this, moved things around, and just made it possible to be here today. And I really appreciate it. What else would you like to share about this topic?
Yeah, I think I just want people to know that there's other ways to do things and to know about the options that they have available to them, like creating our own vigil plans, like this during active death and dying, and having it be this more like sensual experience of really engaging the senses, even, while we're dying, and helps create this environment for those who are around us, like whether it's what type of lighting we want, and a lot, it's just these preferences, and whether it gets carried out or not, depending on the comfort of the people around us. I want it written down, and I want to tell people this is what I want, and do what you're comfortable with, but at least they know, and people would feel it reduces the guilt or the regret or the unknown that our people might feel, because we've explained this.
Yes.
And like the lighting that we want or don't want around, maybe some of us want it really quiet, or other people want it to be really dynamic, joyful, and people coming and going. I want kids around, or like I want my pet up on the bed, or keeping like a little journal next to the bed so we know like maybe who was here last and maybe how they cared for us or what was done, just so that there's like a little bit of overlap during these transitions.
Yes, that's beautiful.
And food is so important to us. And I know that we try to always like feed our loved ones, maybe when they're ill or not wanting to receive this nourishment. And for those of us that still feel like we need to do something, just like even cooking and having those smells that maybe they could enjoy in that space, that could be enough.
It is. And you know what? Because on Wednesday night, going into the final hours on Thursday morning, I was looking at what was happening. And as I said, here was this family and these young people, and there were memories being shared and tears and laughter, and people were cooking, and there's Jeff.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was deep for me. And I didn't stay because I knew tears were coming, but I was taken by the beauty. Like somehow the horror of that experience was just edged out by love. And that's the power of love, and that's the power of community. We don't all have blood family, but we all have friends and an opportunity to really more fully identify this tribe of people that Bree and I are talking about today, that would be willing to have these conversations and to include themselves in these roles because you're talking about it and you're being mindful about it and you're willing to get into the difficulty and the awkwardness, because we know that once we do that, then we can find our way. And I will forever remember that night, these two things coexisting in the same space. I don't want to forget that. And I am happy to talk about it yet again so that people can hopefully consider what might be their new design for death and dying. What conversations might you be willing to have even now during this so-called holiday season that may not, be, that must be attended to. So I so appreciate you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you, and I so appreciate your willingness just to come here and talk with me without much time at all to prepare, but clearly you already are prepared. And, you really didn't know much more than what I told you, and you said yes anyway, and I can really tell you how much I appreciate that. So once again, Rest with Radiance is Bree's website. Bree Corvo has been my guest today. Thank you.
Thanks, Camille. Yeah, thank you.
As we come to an end today in memory of the one and only Jeffrey Young, and I look forward to Jeff settling in on the other side. And when you do, Jeff, we look forward to those signs that we know we'll get from you that tells us all is well. Thanks so much for tuning in to the new Design for Living here on KONR Radio. I will be making this show available in podcast form. You can find out more about that at my Facebook page, Camille Conte, at my website, CamilleConte.com, where all the things I'm doing behind the microphone are listed. Take really good care of yourself. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Whatever you're doing, know that you are loved.